Hola, bienvenidos a Encuentros del Futuro. Vamos a conversar con Laura Gallardo, doctora en Meteorología Química de la Universidad de Estocolmo, profesora asociada del Departamento de Geofísica de la Universidad de Chile y directora del Centro de Ciencia del Clima y la Resiliencia también de la Universidad de Chile, y con Colin Waters, geólogo, profesor honorario en el Departamento de Geología de la Universidad de Leicester y secretario del Anthropocene Working Group. Welcome. It's an honor for me to be here to talk with you about such an interesting and important topic. So let's start.
Thanks.
Laura, what does it mean to be in the Anthropocene? What is this?
I'd like to see it as an opportunity of changing the world. We have a number of different pressures on biodiversity, on climate, on air quality, on biogeochemical cycles, on many other things. And that show that we are not living in a sustainable way, neither a just way. I mean, inequities in the world are too broad and too strong. And I think this is the opportunity to change the world and become happier, become sustainable, become more just and more human.
Do you share this optimism?
It's clearly my role has been to look at the past record and to interpret how things have changed over the last 12,000 years, but particularly over the last 100 years or so, and seeing the scale of change that's happened, particularly across the 1950s, the middle of the 20th century, and the scale of change which is unprecedented on the planet, really. And for me, I suppose my concern is understanding we've got to treat the planet as if it is a laboratory where we're in effect carrying out this experiment. We're changing the chemistry of the planet, we're changing the biology of the planet, and we're not sure what the implications of that will be. And we have modelers who can give us an idea of what the future will be for us, but can never be precise. And I have a concern that uncertainty is something that we have to live with, because even if we start making changes now, the momentum of the change will carry on for decades, if not centuries, into the future. So it's probably safer if we try and make the changes rapidly now for a safer future, I think.
Speaking about the past, is there consensus about when the Anthropocene started?
Oh, no.
What can you tell us about that?
I work with the Anthropocene Working Group, which is the body that's being tasked to look into the truth behind the concept as to whether it should be formalized. Though we don't, as a body, have the voting rights to decide whether it should be formalized, we just say this is what we think is happening. It will then go to other bodies who will then make that decision. But within the group, the majority agree that yes, we are now living in the Anthropocene. And the majority consensus is that the mid-20th century is the most pragmatic position for that boundary. It's the time of greatest and most rapid and global change. But others would prefer perhaps for it not to be even recognized as a geological boundary at all, to have it just as a time transgressive, so as a boundary which is different times in different places. In effect, first human modification of the planet, which is different to the geological concept of time, where we would want to have a single time plane across the entire planet. So there's no agreement, that we should necessarily have the Anthropocene amongst scientists. We still have to go forward with our message, explain scientifically through publications what we believe the Anthropocene is, but then other voting bodies will have to look at that information and decide. And the whole system is designed to be conservative, because we don't like seeing lots of change to the geological timescale. It needs to be fairly fixed for periods of time. So the requirement is that there's a very methodical, long time to investigate the truth behind what we're saying before any decision is made. So technically we don't live in the Anthropocene, though the concept has become so widespread and so popular that people are referring to their own vision of what the Anthropocene means to them, which is difficult, because in science we like to have a formal definition of something, and at present we don't have that. We have our opinion, but no formal definition of what the term means.
That's from a geological point of view, but from other sciences, we are seeing so many pressures in an unprecedented scale that we tend to use the Anthropocene as a thing that's happening nevertheless. That's a nuance that differs among scientists, but and some others that don't believe or don't want to believe or don't want to take into account this evidence existent. But in general, I would say there is a consensus that we are living a very unique time, and a time of humongous pressures on the system and putting in risk not only our own survival, but of the many species, and in putting into question the way we live in this planet, in this blue planet in the solar system that, as far as we know, is the one able to sustain life.
What would you say, Laura, are the biggest challenges, the biggest pressures, as you say?
There are many. There are many. Climate change, of course. We have a bit more than a decade, perhaps, to take fundamental decisions regarding decarbonization. We have fundamental decisions regarding governance, the pressures on the system regarding biogeochemical cycles, regarding biodiversity, regarding climate require of new agreements, new ways of living and living together in cities, in how to provide food for this growing population, have food security, have air security, have ocean security, etc., etc. So I think we have to change the way we live in this planet altogether. And that's the way, that's why I want to see it as an opportunity, because, I mean, you cannot do much about catastrophes once they happened, but you can do a lot to prevent and to change and reflect about the way we have been living over the last 200 years, which has been good in many ways. I mean, we have never been so rich at a global scale. We have never been so we know a lot. Our standard of living in general has improved, at least on average. Of course, for some more than for others, but there is an opportunity to change, and we cannot sustain this way of living. Buying stuff, changing telephones, changing cars, moving in like we were alone in the world, and we are not. And we are a species that need of others to survive and to thrive in this world.
I think one of the positive things that I see that's happened really over the last, probably since the 1970s, is how scientists have been able to, almost in real time, monitor the changes that we are creating to the planet. It would be less than 5 decades ago, you'd probably be hearing the story that humans have very little impact on the planet, maybe locally, but that the planet's nature is too big to be affected by humans. And our thought about this has changed radically over the last few decades. And the fact that we can actually now recognize a change to the planet almost in real time, and then it's a case of the policymakers deciding, what should we do about this? Is this something that we can accept, the changes continuing to happen as they are, or should we make a change? And in some cases, the turnaround has been very dramatic, and mentioned about things like radionuclide fallout from testing nuclear weapons. That had been happening between 1945 and 1963, almost without any control. And then they had a partial treaty saying, well, no more atmospheric testing, put the testing underground so there's no more fallout. And so very rapidly, we then go back to almost pre-1945 levels of these artificial radionuclides. So we can make a decision and change the planet very quickly in some cases. But then with regard to things like carbon dioxide and methane, making a decision now is looking forward, if not centuries, maybe even millennia into the future as to what will happen to the planet. So we are unfortunately in a position where a decision made now is going to be affecting not our grandchildren, but many generations into the future. And that is something that's a concern, in not knowing what will happen, despite all of the mathematical modeling we can do. There are so many uncertainties as to what the future holds.
And it's key to have policymakers, of course, they have a duty to do that. But I think citizens in general, people in general, also have a duty to push forward those changes and to elect the right policymakers or the right politicians in the right positions and to move and change ourselves. There is this kid that went to the COP24 in Poland that gave a really compelling talk to policymakers. And she said she's a teenager, like 13, 14 years old from Sweden. And she's saying, you know, if you don't do it, we will do it. Because we cannot live, I mean, this is my future, it's not yours. And I think that's a good thing, that people, in this case, take action and put a pressure on policymaking and politicians.
It's good that science now has become more forward-facing to the population. We in effect fund the science we do. Again, going back a few decades, a scientist would have been working in a very isolated environment, talking to other scientists. And we're fully aware now that the population we're speaking to is our own peers, but also to the world. And it's important that the message we have is something that's understandable to the general population. So to be able to present at meetings like this, where we're talking to not just scientists and not just politicians, but to everybody who wants to hear the story, is something that means that the population becomes aware of our impact on the planet, and it will be them that will be calling for change in the future. So it's important that they are correctly informed, because it's very easily with the internet these days to get lots of different versions. And I think it's important to know who you can trust with regard to any potential discussion about changes to the planet. I mean, that scientists have to go through a very rigorous procedure when they publish their work. And so that peer review makes sure that you can't just come up with any statement you want to. Whereas on the internet, it's very easy for people just to say anything they want. And it can appear to be equally believable to someone who doesn't know the background to the topic. So it's important that our message is correctly passed to everybody who's interested.
Okay, we will resume talking about what we as citizens can and should do, and also what our leaders can and should be doing after a very short break. Vamos a un corte en este nuevo encuentro del futuro y volvemos muy pronto para seguir hablando del antropoceno.
We humans are social animals.
Tenemos la base de datos más grande que jamás se haya tenido sobre comportamiento humano.
Necesitamos de nuevos paradigmas, de nuevas formas de hacer las cosas con procesos cada vez más participativos.
We should know that if we do want to make the world a better place, we need to take a look at ourselves and make a change.
Estamos de vuelta en Encuentros del Futuro, conversando con Laura Gallardo y Colin Waters sobre el antropoceno, el cambio climático y los desafíos que enfrentamos como humanidad. Laura, please tell us about the consensus regarding climate change. Are we all agreeing that it's a fact and it's caused by humans, or are some people, even presidents, who still deny it?
Who are not scientists. Well, there are people who also believe that the Earth is flat as a pancake. So, what can you do? That evolution doesn't exist.
And
but
the Earth
science
is 10,000 years old.
But science is not a matter of belief. It's a matter of method, rigor, proof, testing. So, skepticism is part of science. Deniers are not part of science. And there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that we have caused substantial changes in the way the Earth is functioning and the Earth's climate is functioning. That's not to say that there is no natural variability. Of course there is natural variability. The system has worked for 4 billion years, roughly, working on its own. And it still keeps working on its own. But the thing is that the rate of change that we have seen is caused mainly and unequivocally due to human activities. And that's a clear consensus. There is no, we can discuss to what extent the climate sensitivity is this or that, or the role of clouds, or how do we represent clouds in models, and many interactions. But there is an overwhelming amount of evidence regarding the impact of humans on the planet. So that's not a matter of discussion. It's like the Earth is roughly a sphere, not exactly in a sphere, but roughly in a sphere, and not flat as a pancake.
We have, over the last 2.5 million years, we've been in a cycle of change from glacials to interglacial periods. We are considering ourselves now in an interglacial, but we've had, the geological record tells us, something about 50 glacial and then 50 interglacial cycles, and where you can actually see the evidence for climate change happening on a natural variability. And so we have an understanding of the parameters of what that represents. And things like carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere will change depending on whether you're in a glacial or an interglacial. And so we can predict where we should be within a cycle at present, and we should be in a time where temperatures are falling. The peak temperatures in the last 12,000 years was about 7,000 years ago, and after that it kept falling. We had a point from about 1200 AD through to about 1850 AD, where we were in what called a little ice age. So the temperatures were cool. Some of the rivers, like the River Thames in London, would freeze over in the wintertime, and they would have fairs there. So that was really what we were expecting to continue. If you're looking at the scientific evidence, that should continue and get colder and colder until eventually we go back into the next ice age. That could be in a few tens of thousands of years' time if we go by typical durations of these interglacials. But since 1850s, there's been a significant change in, first of all, the amount of greenhouse gases produced, which is because of burning of fossil fuels by humans, and the implications then on temperatures, which have also started to rise. It's been about 1.2 degrees centigrade rise since 1850. That's against the trend that we'd expect it to be, which should be falling. And then similarly, the way that the climate change has affected sea level change as well, which is also rising. And so at present, sea level is the highest it's been for about 115,000 years, and is rising at the rate of about 3 millimeters per year. So it's an accelerating increase in rate of sea level rise. Temperatures, well, I mean, we don't know where we're heading in some respects, because the carbon dioxide concentrations we have at present, that the 120 parts per million we've added to the atmosphere in the last century and a half, puts us to a point where the concentrations are now as high as they were 3 billion years ago. And 3 billion years ago, temperatures were about 2 or 3 degrees centigrade warmer, and sea level was about 10 to 20 meters higher. So is that the future we're looking towards with the current atmospheric composition of carbon dioxide? So, we are, again, talking about a future scenario which the evidence is there in the geology, but of course the geological models didn't have that other factor, which was the humans. That was all natural variability. We're now looking at our impact as well on top of that.
So if there is such a consensus, why are there some political leaders, even the president of the most powerful country on earth, not doing enough? On the contrary, retiring the United States from the Paris Agreement?
There are several things to that. One is that the changes that have to be made cost money to some people. There are business in risk, businesses that have to change. And that, of course, I guess, make people, changing is difficult in a private, personal way, on a country level, on a global level like this is. But there's also the good side of change. Now, regarding the US, fortunately, is a federate state. So the states are taking decisions, and California, for instance, is keeping the climate policies they have undertaken before, and even trying to be more ambitious. So I think those phenomena of having this sort of people that try to give a very simplified picture of the world is part of the reaction to the imminent change we have to face. Unfortunately, he's not alone. There are a few others, but in general, I think the Paris Agreement showed that there is an overall majority of people understanding that this is a change, even in industry or in businesses. I mean, last year I had the opportunity to hear one of the big shots of one international transnational company, and he said, you know, decarbonization is the way forward, and those who are well prepared for this will do good business. So it's not a matter of ideological points of view, it's a matter of fact. And I think we have to take stock of what we know and move forward, but we have to do it fast.
I think that the difficulty is that environmental change and climate change is a very long-term issue. We're sort of planning for what's going to happen in centuries into the future, whereas politics is always 4 years or 5 year cycles. And I always find it fascinating that there's a background discussion of environmental science throughout year on year, but when it comes to elections, suddenly it's the imminent taxation and jobs becomes the big issue, and environment is never discussed. So you can understand why politicians are driven by the immediate trying to win votes, and maybe relatively few people, maybe I'm wrong here, but relatively few people vote purely on the environmental issues. It's the financial impact on you that's more important at that point. So maybe we need to be driving politicians to realize that they can win votes by dealing things with environmental change as part of their policies. And maybe we're not actually convincing them. And there's a groundswell of people who are saying this is important to them. And if politicians then realize they will win votes by this, then they will perhaps change their ways.
But there are cases like the case of Chile, for instance, regarding renewable energy, in which the country can become, for instance, independent of using fossil fuel. We import the vast majority of our fossil fuel, so moving towards solar power, wind power, geothermal energy, which is substantial in this country. It's a way forward and a way of independence and of good business. I mean, I don't think the electricity sector has changed because of environmental hippie thoughts. No, there is a business into that. And that's one point to it. And so there are differences around the world. Also, I think extremes that are expected to increase are also putting a pressure into politicians. I mean, the things that we have been seeing, like the fires or extreme precipitation or drought, it takes a toll that is too big not to pay attention to that.
And in this very complex and challenging scenario, could you name some initiatives that make you optimistic, that are doing good things in a relevant, significant scale?
Well, the Paris Agreement wasn't a step forward. There is discussions how to, now we have to be able to follow up what the promises we made. We have to improve those promises. What we promised in 2015 is not enough. It's far too much. I mean, we are committing to temperature increases up to between 3 and 4 degrees, which is awful. In many respects, is risky. So we have to be more ambitious regarding what we put together, and that's going to happen next year. We have to come up with new commitments, and hopefully there will be more commitment. That's one. Perhaps another one, which is a bit from the past, the ozone hole. We were able to come to an agreement and change the trends in depletion of ozone. And it was an international agreement. So we are able, and there are many other human rights, etc. So humanity has shown the ability to be better and to improve.
Yeah. In a different field, I think conservation, biodiversity of species on our planet is one of the significant changes that's happening in the Anthropocene. And people like WWF and their recent report recognizing that populations of wild species are decreasing by 60%, in South America by 89%. Yes. That really raises this concern that if we don't act soon in conservation of species, endemic species being protected at the same time that we are increasing biological diversity by bringing species across the planet. Sometimes we gain greatly by having different crops, having things like plants in our gardens that we like, but at the same time being able to protect the endemic species as well, so that we don't lose that diversity, the loss of not just populations, but in fact extinction events. There's no reason in this planet now that we should be allowing species to die. We have the opportunity to save them, and I think it's better and richer for the planet that we can keep these populations continuing.
Thank you very much. Let's hope that this optimistic can be transmitted to our viewers, and let's all do all we can to revert this tendency. Muchas gracias. Aquí terminamos este encuentro del futuro con Laura Gallardo y Colin Waters.